Hey guys, tonight we begin in the middle of a world at war. A Mediterranean carved up between titans. It's 214 BCE, and you're standing on the cliffs of Sicily. The sea stretched out like hammered bronze beneath a blood-orange sky. Down below, the Roman fleet glints in the light. Hundreds of ships, oars flashing, carrying legions that have marched across half the world. You can smell pitch and salt, the tang of iron in the air. The drums thump, steady as heartbeats. The Romans are coming. You probably won't survive this one, but then again, neither did Syracuse. Before we begin, hit subscribe if you live for ancient fire and forgotten cities. Drop your local time in the comments. Are you watching from dusk or dawn tonight? Because either way, we're sailing toward the storm. You trudge along the harbour road, watching merchants haul amphorae onto carts, each one stamped with the trident seal of Syracuse. For centuries, this city has been the jewel of Sicily, part Greek, part Sicilian, and all pride. Founded by Corinthian settlers almost 500 years earlier, Syracuse grew into a fortress of art, philosophy, and power. Its harbour alone could swallow half a navy. Its walls, massive and blinding white, climb the slopes of Ortygia like marble ribs around a heart. But now, that heart beats in panic. To understand why Rome's legions are here, you need to look back just a few years, across the straits to Italy itself. The Second Punic War has set the world ablaze. Hannibal, the Carthaginian genius, has marched elephants over the Alps, annihilating Roman armies at Trebia, Trasimene, and Cannae. The Republic is bleeding, desperate for allies, terrified of rebellion. Sicily sits right between Rome and Carthage, the bridge of the Mediterranean, and both sides know whoever controls it controls the sea. For decades, Syracuse managed to walk the knife's edge between them. Under King Hiero III, the city paid tribute to Rome but kept its dignity. Hiero was shrewd. He built temples, harbours, and peace. He also hired the greatest mind of his age, Archimedes. The old mathematician's inventions filled the city: cranes that lifted ships, screw pumps that drained docks, and catapults that hurled stones with terrifying precision. His genius was Syracuse's secret weapon and symbol of independence, but Hiero is gone now. His death has left a vacuum, and into that vacuum rushes chaos. The alliance with Rome trembles, old rivalries resurface, and Carthaginian gold begins to whisper through the markets. Rome watches with that cold, patient expression it wears before every conquest. You can imagine the Senate in full session, senators draped in white, the floor echoing with anger. "Syracuse toys with Carthage," one roars. "Let them learn who rules the seas." And that's all it takes. The Republic that has already crushed Carthage's fleets now turns its gaze on the Greek pearl of Sicily. Two generals, Marcus Claudius Marcellus and Appius Claudius Pulcher, receive orders to bring the city to heel. Marcellus, especially, is no stranger to war. They call him the Sword of Rome. He once earned the Spolia Opima, the rare honour of killing an enemy commander in single combat. To him, Syracuse is both strategic prize and personal challenge. He's heard of Archimedes' machines, and he's eager to test Roman discipline against Greek ingenuity. Across the island, rumours spread like wildfire. Farmers whisper that Roman catapults can throw entire wagons. Sailors claim their rams can split stone. In Ortygia's courtyards, citizens argue whether the city should surrender or fight. Merchants hide their gold under floorboards, and on the hilltop citadel engineers begin reinforcing the walls, consulting Archimedes himself. By autumn, Rome's armies are already on the move. Appius marches along the coast from Messana with legions hardened by the Punic front. Marcellus commands the fleet. Quinqueremes with bronze rams, their decks packed with siege gear. The sea becomes a mirror of iron. The people of Syracuse watch from their towers, wondering whether their machines, their gods, and their genius can hold back the greatest army the world has ever seen. The wind shifts. You can taste salt and dread. The siege of Syracuse is about to begin, and history is about to decide whether intellect can triumph over empire. The city of Syracuse glows like a gemstone under the Sicilian sun, but beneath its marble skin beats a nervous heart. You walk its streets in 213 BCE and hear three languages in every marketplace: Greek, Latin, and Punic. Traders sell amphorae of oil beside soldiers sharpening spears. The scent of sea salt, wine, and olive smoke fills the air, a reminder that this is not just a city, it's a civilization in miniature. Syracuse has long been called the Jewel of Sicily. For centuries it was the meeting point of Greek reason and Mediterranean ambition, a place where poets recited in marble theatres while mathematicians drew circles in the sand. The harbour is a half-moon of turquoise, lined with arsenals that build triremes faster than most cities build houses. Everywhere you look stands a reminder of power, temples to Athena and Apollo, marble stowers, colossal gates that could repel an army. And for decades they did. King Hiroto kept it that way. His rule, nearly half a century, was the city's golden peace. A veteran of Pyrrhus's campaigns, he had seen too much war to want more. He paid tribute to Rome after Carthage's first defeat, but ruled with independence, balancing politics like a scale. Under his eye, the docks thrived, the theatres filled, and grain ships from the island fed half of Italy. He was clever enough to flatter Roman pride without surrendering Greek dignity. And he had a secret weapon, Archimedes. The king treated him less like a servant and more like a national treasure. While philosophers debated in Athens, Archimedes built in Syracuse cranes that lifted cargo with a single pull, defensive engines that could fling boulders across the harbour, even mirrors that could ignite ships at distance. To Hiero, the mathematician was proof that intellect could protect the city as surely as iron, but peace never survives its maker. In 215 BCE, the old king died, and the delicate balance died with him. The throne passed to his teenage grandson Hieronymus, spoiled by luxury and convinced he was the next Alexander. Rome was weary from Hannibal's victories on the mainland, and Carthage still lurked beyond the sea. Hieronymus decided Syracuse should play both sides. He sent envoys to Carthage, dreaming of new alliances and easy riches. It was a fatal move. Rome's diplomats arrived too late to stop him. In the Senate, Hieronymus's name became a curse. The boy spits on Rome's friendship, one senator spat, then let him choke on it. Orders were given: isolate Syracuse, seize Sicily, cut off Carthage's last friendly port. 2 consuls, Marcellus and Appius Claudius, were chosen for the task. Back in Syracuse, the young king played conqueror in the palace, draping himself in purple and hosting feasts as the horizon darkened with Roman sails. His advisers bickered, some urging peace, others rebellion. The people watched nervously as soldiers drilled in the streets. They remembered what had happened to cities that defied Rome: Corinth smouldering, Tarentum starved, Carthaginian colonies levelled. Within months the dream collapsed. Hieronymus was assassinated in Leontini, stabbed by conspirators before he could see his first real battle. His death threw Syracuse into chaos. Factions tore the city apart. One wanted reconciliation with Rome, another demanded alliance with Carthage. The walls echoed with shouts, not prayers. By the time word reached Marcellus, Syracuse had effectively declared independence from both powers. The Roman general smiled. Rebellion was justification enough. The fleet sailed from Messana, 30,000 men under crimson standards. The sea churned with oars, the sky streaked with gulls, and the Sicilian coast began to tremble beneath the thunder of invasion. Inside Syracuse, Archimedes worked in silence. He had served Hiero, not Hieronymus. War disgusted him. Yet when the city begged for his aid, he could not refuse. He redesigned old engines, calibrated new ones, turned geometry into weaponry. From his workshop overlooking the harbour, he watched Rome's ships approach and muttered almost kindly, "Give me a place to stand, and I will move the world." The place was Syracuse. The world was about to feel it. The funeral torches of Hero II have barely burned out when the city begins to tear itself apart. You stand in the agora as banners change hands like dice. Every faction claims to know what's best. Loyalty to Rome, alliance with Carthage, isolation, revenge. The people don't realize it yet, but the argument will kill more of them than any sword. The old king had kept Syracuse united by sheer reputation. His death leaves only ambition. Into the void steps his grandson, Hieronymus, 17, spoiled, and utterly convinced he's the second coming of Alexander. You can see it in his parade armour, gilded cuirass, purple cloak, chin tilted toward the horizon like destiny itself owes him tribute. He parades through Ortygia while courtiers clap nervously, whispering that the boy's tutors have filled his head with dreams of empire. He wants to conquer, not govern. The city's elders, the same men who once obeyed Hero without question, now murmur uneasily. They know what happens to small kings who defy Rome, but Hieronymus won't listen. Rome is struggling against Hannibal, legions are dying in Italy, the Great Republic looks wounded. To him, that means opportunity. Carthage is rising again, he boasts at a feast, spilling wine over a map of Sicily, and I will ride with it. The courtiers laugh too loudly. Somewhere at the table a general lowers his eyes. The gods, they say, blind young rulers before they destroy them. Within months, Syracuse's envoys are in Carthage signing secret treaties. Punic gold arrives in crates disguised as olive oil. Carthaginian emissaries whisper promises of protection and power. In the palace, Hieronymus begins striking coins with his own face, a symbolic declaration that Syracuse owes no allegiance to Rome. The Senate in faraway Rome takes note, and the word rebellion begins echoing through its marble halls. Meanwhile, in the streets, tension curdles into fear. Rome has spies everywhere. Anyone could be an informer. People speak in half sentences and watch the harbours nervously. The merchants know what comes next. Embargo, blockade, siege. They've seen it before in other cities that thought themselves untouchable. Then, without warning, the young king's arrogance catches up with him. On the road to Leontini, a small Sicilian town, Hieronymus is ambushed by conspirators. The assassins strike fast. Blades flash, shouts echo, and within moments the would-be conqueror lies bleeding in the dust. His reign ends before it began. But death doesn't bring peace. It brings civil war. In Syracuse, two factions seize control at once. One declares loyalty to Rome, led by nobles who fear destruction. The other pledges to Carthage, fueled by pride and vengeance. The result is chaos, executions, mobs, and a carousel of coups that spin faster than the city can keep up. Each dawn brings a new government. Each night brings a new purge. Outside the city walls, farmers flee as Roman patrols sweep the countryside. Marcellus and Appius Claudius have already landed on the island, tightening their grip around Syracuse's allies. The message is clear. Surrender now or burn later. Inside the walls, the Carthaginian faction gains the upper hand and sends desperate pleas for reinforcements. A Punic fleet is promised, but it never arrives in time. The Romans are faster, hungrier, and far less forgiving. Amid the panic, Archimedes works in silence. The old mathematician avoids politics the way others avoid plague. His only allegiance is to logic. But the new Syracusan leaders know his genius is their only hope. They beg him to design defences, to use his inventions not for harbour construction but for war. And so, reluctantly, the scholar becomes an engineer of death. You can imagine him pacing the city walls, measuring angles, watching the sea through a brass tube. He sketches machines that can pull ships out of the water, mirrors that focus sunlight to ignite sails, catapults calibrated by geometry rather than guesswork. War, he mutters, is merely physics with human consequences. When news of Hieronymus's death reaches Rome, the Senate wastes no time. Syracuse has betrayed us, Marcellus announces. Let its beauty be our warning to others. The legions cheer, their armour glinting in the Sicilian sun. The fleets assemble again, oars cutting the water in perfect rhythm, banners snapping in the wind. Behind them, the distant smoke of Hannibal's campaigns rises over Italy like an omen. The world is shifting, and Syracuse stands in the way of its new master. Inside the walls, Archimedes sets down his compass. So, he sighs, the Romans will test my theories. Outside, the horizon darkens with sails. You're standing on the Sicilian coast as the horizon turns black with sails. The year is 213 BCE, and Rome has finally made up its mind. Enough diplomacy, enough hesitation. Two armies, two commanders, Appius Claudius Pulcher and Marcus Claudius Marcellus are now sailing for Syracuse, bringing with them the full machinery of the Republic's vengeance. The order from the Senate is simple: take the city, no compromise. The wind carries the creak of oars and the groan of timbers. The Roman fleet is enormous, a wall of quinqueremes cutting through the surf, each one bristling with catapults and boarding ramps. On deck, legionaries polish their shields, the sunlight flashing off them like a signal. They've heard stories about Syracuse, the richest city in Sicily, its harbour deep enough to swallow navies, its walls said to be the tallest in the Greek world. But they've also heard darker things, that its citizens are brilliant, arrogant, and cursed with a philosopher who builds war machines instead of temples. His name is already circulating among the soldiers, Archimedes. Marcellus, the sword of Rome, watches from the flagship, eyes narrowed. He's been fighting Carthaginians for years, and he respects enemies who resist. But this city, intrigues him more than any battlefield. Syracuse is legendary, a Greek jewel that somehow survived centuries of conquest, now daring to stand between Rome and victory. To Marcellus, that makes it personal. Back in Syracuse, the alarm bells echo across the bay. Fishermen abandon their nets, and traders pull their ships ashore. The city's walls bristle with soldiers and engineers. The new rulers, the anti-Roman faction that rose after Hieronymus's death, send word to Carthage begging for reinforcements. None come. The Punic navy is busy elsewhere, bleeding itself dry against Roman fleets near Spain and Sardinia. Syracuse will have to stand alone. That's when Archimedes steps forward. The scholar, now in his 70s, is dragged out of his workshop by desperate officials. He's the last living link to the age of Hiero, and their only hope. They beg him to devise something, anything that can stop Rome's assault. He sighs, wipes chalk from his hands, and agrees. Then we must teach them geometry, he says. He orders his apprentices to haul out old sketches, wooden gears, and half-finished devices. Soon the docks are littered with cranes, pulleys, and strange metal arms. The citizens watch in confusion as these skeletal contraptions rise above the ramparts. The soldiers call them Archimedes' claws. The legend will soon call them the hands of hell. On the Roman side, Marcellus divides his force. Appius Claudius will lead the land siege, tightening the noose around the city's outer walls, while Marcellus himself commands the sea assault, aiming to storm the harbour. His plan is straightforward: overwhelm Syracuse from both directions before its allies can react. What he doesn't know is that Archimedes has turned the city into one enormous trap. The first Roman attack comes at dawn. Dozens of siege towers rumble forward, their wooden hides glistening with wet oxhide to resist fire. Archers line the decks of the ships, catapults ready. The air fills with a metallic whine of tension, rope, wood, and ambition stretched to breaking. Then Marcellus gives the signal. A thunderous crash echoes across the bay as boulders the size of oxen slam into the walls. The Romans cheer until the walls answer back. Archimedes' machines fire in perfect unison. Massive stones arc through the air with impossible precision. Siege towers splinter. Roman ships flip backward as mechanical arms seize them from the water and drop them like toys. One legionary swears he saw the sea itself come alive. Claws, ropes, beams, all moving under the old man's invisible command. Panic ripples through the ranks. When the survivors retreat, Marcellus stares in disbelief. "One man," he mutters. "One man holds off all of Rome." He orders another attack the next day, and the next, but the results are the same. Every time his forces advance, the machines strike. Stones from nowhere, fire from the heavens, ships plucked from the sea. Word spreads that Archimedes has enslaved the gods of mechanics. At night, the Roman camps burn torches. But no, one sleeps. Soldiers whisper about mirrors that set ships aflame, about a ghostly light that moves along the walls. In truth, it's sunlight reflected by polished bronze shields, an experiment turned weapon. Whether it truly burns ships or just mines doesn't matter. Fear has done half the old man's work. Inside Syracuse, morale soars. The people call Archimedes the city's saviour, parading through the streets with garlands and wine. But the old man doesn't celebrate. He knows mathematics can't hold off hunger. He warns the generals that machines can't outlast time. The problem with brilliance, he mutters to an aide, is that it can't cook bread. And he's right. While Syracuse marvels at its own genius, the Romans simply tighten their blockade. They don't need to break the walls. They'll just wait for starvation to do the geometry. The siege of Syracuse has begun, not in fire, but in patience. Rome has learned that even against genius, endurance wins. You're standing on the battlements of Syracuse as the sun blazes white across the harbour. Below, the Roman fleet churns in slow circles, hundreds of oars stabbing the water like synchronized knives. The siege has entered its second month, and the city is learning the strange rhythm of endurance. Work, watch, wait. The smell of salt and sweat never leaves the air. The Romans have built floating siege towers, enormous wooden fortresses lashed to ships. They drift toward the walls with grinding menace, archers perched on their decks. From above, the Syracusans fire arrows, pour boiling oil, roll down stones. But today the defence looks different. Along the sea walls, Archimedes' new devices stand ready, their ropes coiled, counterweights set. The old man himself walks calmly among his apprentices, drawing lines in the dust with his staff. "Lift on m'account," he says, voice dry but steady. He might as well be lecturing geometry students instead of commanding a war. The first Roman ship closes in. You can see soldiers straining at oars, their faces hidden by helmets. Then, with a creak like a beast waking, one of Archimedes' cranes swings out. Iron hooks dangle from chains, catching the prow of the ship. A shout rises, confusion, fear, and then the entire vessel tilts upward, bow lifted from the sea, men tumble off like pebbles, the crane releases, the ship crashes back into the harbour with a roar. Silence follows, broken only by the hiss of water and a few panicked cries. Marcellus, watching from his flagship, grips the rail until his knuckles whiten. "By the gods," he whispers, "he's turned the walls into machines." The next wave of ships hesitates. The Roman commander orders them forward again, but the crews row half-heartedly. Each yard feels like an invitation to die. When the catapults start firing, it's not just random bombardment. Every stone lands exactly where it hurts most. Archimedes. Calculations turn warfare into choreography. One by one, ships splinter, masts collapse, and the survivors pull back, haunted by the sound of invisible precision. For days, this grim theatre repeats. Every Roman attack ends the same way. Destruction from nowhere. Soldiers swear the old man can see the future. They whisper that even Jupiter must be his accomplice. When he lifts his hand, one legionary mutters, the sky itself throws stones. The nickname, the Roman flair, spreads through the camp like infection. On land, Appius Claudius fares no better. His troops assault the walls north of the city, only to be repelled by crossbows and catapults of impossible range. Archimedes had designed them to fire at multiple angles, small ones for close combat, large torsion engines for distance. The Romans, who pride themselves on engineering, find themselves beaten by a mathematician. It's humiliating. At night, Syracuse glows with victory fires. Musicians play in the agora, women bring food to the soldiers, and children chant Archimedes' name as if he were a god. But the old man doesn't join the celebrations. In his modest house near the shrine of Athena, he sits among scrolls and diagrams, frowning. "Every problem," he murmurs, "has a limit. The city believes it's invincible. He knows better." Outside the walls, the Roman camps grow larger. Marcellus has learned from defeat. If he can't overpower Syracuse, he'll outlast it. His engineers begin constructing a massive counter-wall, a ring of earthworks, ditches, and wooden towers that will trap the city from land and sea. No one enters. No one leaves. The siege tightens like a mathematical proof, inevitable, precise, merciless. Summer fades. The heat thickens, and with it comes disease. Flies swarm over the camps. Rot seeps into the tents. Soldiers cough through sleepless nights. haunted by fever and the smell of stagnant water. Yet Rome endures. Its strength has always been patience. Marcellus waits, watching the city's lights flicker like stars about to burn out. Inside Syracuse, the mood shifts. Bread grows scarce. The markets close early. The citizens start blaming each other. Soldiers accuse merchants of hoarding grain. Priests claim the gods are angry. Politicians argue over whether Archimedes should have attacked instead of defended. The mathematician ignores them. He keeps working, even as hunger creeps through the streets. One afternoon, from the high tower near the great harbour, you spot a group of Roman scouts dragging something across the sand. At first, you think it's another siege engine, but no. They're building a palisade, a barrier stretching from the sea to the hills. The realization hits. The blockade is complete. Syracuse is an island within an island, its genius trapped by brute endurance. Marcellus doesn't celebrate. He just writes to the Senate. The city resists with cunning beyond belief. I will starve them until reason fails. And as dusk settles over the bay, Archimedes stands by his latest creation, a polished array of mirrors gleaming in the last light. He adjusts one, squints, and smiles faintly. Down below, a Roman ship drifts too close, its sail catching a sudden spark. The men shout, trying to douse the flame. For a brief moment it works, then the wind changes and the fire climbs. Archimedes turns away before it burns out. A lesson in reflection, he murmurs. They'll learn. But the city's laughter grows quieter each night. Victory, like sunlight, doesn't last forever. The months stretch long and dry. The sound of the sea becomes background to exhaustion. Waves, hammers, groans. By now, 212 BCE, the siege of Syracuse has settled into a terrible balance. Rome cannot breach the walls. Syracuse cannot break the blockade. The island bakes under the Sicilian sun, and both sides rot slowly in its heat. Inside the city, Archimedes' war machines stand silent. Their wooden arms hang like the bones of some sleeping beast. The first great victories feel like memories now, exaggerated tales to keep morale alive. Food grows scarce. The granaries, once filled with Sicilian wheat, echo hollow. Bread is rationed. The markets are empty except for arguments and flies. At night the harbour glimmers with lanterns, Rome's ships keeping watch. The soldiers on deck whisper that the city's lights look like eyes staring back. Sometimes they swear they see shadows moving along the walls, old ghosts pacing. Others say Archimedes himself never sleeps, that he walks the ramparts drawing equations in the dust, summoning storms. The truth is simpler. He's trying to hold together a city that worships him in the morning and blames him by dusk. Disease spreads in both camps. In the Roman trenches, dysentery and fever kill as many as the catapults once did. Marcellus burns the corpses to stop infection, the smoke curling into a sky that smells of salt and death. Yet the general remains calm. They can throw stones, he says to his officers, but they can't eat them. He knows time is his ally. Syracuse begins to fracture. The upper city, Epipolae, houses the soldiers and engineers. Ortygia, the island heart, holds the wealthy and the priests. Each blames the other for hunger. The Carthaginian faction demands more help from across the sea. The pragmatists whisper that it's time to negotiate. But Carthage sends no fleet. The Syracusans are alone, surrounded by an empire that never forgets an insult. You walk the narrow streets and see what hunger does to genius. The marble colonnades are quiet. Artists sell sketches for bread. The temples still smoke with offerings, but the priests have begun melting bronze votives for coin. Mothers trade jewellery for grain. Soldiers patrol with eyes sunken deep. The city that once boasted of its intellect now looks like a fever dream of survival. Archimedes still works, though slower now. His workshop smells of oil and seawater. He builds smaller things, improvements, not miracles, and scribbles notes on the backs of old scrolls. They want fire from the gods, he sighs to an apprentice, but the gods charge too much. He sends his aides to measure the tides, to test catapult ranges, to ration the remaining supply of bolts and stones. Even he knows the end is mathematical now. Finite food, infinite siege. Outside, the Romans wait like vultures. Marcellus orders trenches deepened, siege towers repaired, and spies sent among the Sicilians. Bribes flow to the city's merchants. Loyalty wavers. At night, Roman scouts creep close to the walls to test weaknesses. One is captured, beaten, and hung from a gate. The message is clear, but so is the desperation. By autumn, storms roll in from the sea. Rain floods the Roman camps, turning trenches into rivers of mud. The soldiers curse. The slaves labour endlessly to rebuild embankments. Yet every downpour brings them closer. The city's cisterns overflow, but no ships bring food. Rome can endure the weather. Syracuse cannot. Then one morning, the wind shifts, and the smell of decay thickens. The fishmongers' stalls are empty, the last nets hauled in and burned for warmth. A new kind of silence spreads, not peace, but fatigue. Even the gulls have left the harbour. Marcellus senses it. They are softening, he tells his tribunes. When hunger speaks louder than courage, the walls will open themselves. He tightens the cordon, cutting off every outlet. Archimedes feels it too. He stands atop the city wall, looking down at the Roman encampment that circles like a ring of iron. They've learned patience, he murmurs, almost admiringly. His apprentice asks if the city can still hold. The old man closes his eyes. Hold, he repeats. We're calculating the end. Every number points to surrender. But pride doesn't starve easily. The Syracusans remember their victories, their genius, their king. They convince themselves that Rome will tire first, that Carthage will arrive in time. Every rumour becomes a prayer. Every echo on the wind sounds like sails. Winter looms again. Fires flicker weakly in the courtyards. The marble walls that once shone in sunlight now drip with rain and soot. Syracuse, the city of philosophers and poets, has become a fortress of ghosts. And still the Romans wait. Silent, methodical, inevitable. Winter presses down on Sicily like a shroud. The wind lashes rain against the harbour walls, and every street in Syracuse smells of salt, smoke, and hunger. You wake to the sound of church bells and thunder, though no one's sure which is which anymore. The siege has lasted nearly 2 years now. Rome remains outside, patient as stone. Syracuse remains inside, proud and starving. The Romans have learned to move like the weather. Marcellus keeps his men disciplined, rotating patrols, rationing supplies, building more siege engines. His tents stand in neat rows even when half the camp is mud. Each morning he walks the perimeter with his cloak pulled tight, his gaze fixed on the silent walls. She's beautiful, he mutters once, almost tenderly. It's a pity she has to die. Inside the walls, beauty has rotted into endurance. The Syracusans have eaten through their grain reserves, their livestock, their pride. They've even stripped copper from the temples to forge more bolts. Priests pray to Athena for deliverance. No one mentions that the goddess has been quiet for months. The people still trust Archimedes, but the man himself barely sleeps. In his workshop, the air is thick with oil and fatigue. Scrolls litter the floor, equations, diagrams, scribbles of frustration. He knows the city's defences are holding by luck, not strategy. Mathematics, he sighs to his apprentices, does not account for starvation. The young men nod but say nothing. They've seen him mutter to himself, tracing invisible circles on the table. Genius and despair are hard to tell apart now. Across the bay, the Roman fleet looms, massive, silent, unhurried. At night, the soldiers light torches that flicker like a second constellation. Syracuse's citizens watch those lights from rooftops, wondering which flame will be theirs. The wind carries laughter from the Roman camp, songs in Latin that sound like triumph. Hunger has no music in Greek. Then, as spring creeps back, Marcellus changes tactics. He knows brute force will only waste men. Instead, he launches a new kind of attack. Small, sudden raids meant to break morale. Roman troops strike at night, feinting toward the harbour, then vanishing into the dark. Each skirmish costs lives, but none gains ground. Still, it keeps Syracuse awake, restless, terrified. One night, A Roman galley drifts too close to the wall. A torch flares. One of Archimedes' signal mirrors flashes back and catapults thunder. The galley explodes in fire. Cheers echo across the ramparts. For a moment, the city remembers what victory feels like. Archimedes doesn't cheer. He just exhales. A little light against a dark tide, he says. But the tide doesn't stop. Weeks pass, then months. Disease blooms again. The Roman trenches fill with corpses, the Syracusan streets with whispers. Carthage has promised aid, but delivers only rumours. The ships never come. Every sailor knows that sailing into a Roman blockade is suicide. The once proud city now survives on dried herbs and thin soup. Even Archimedes can't calculate how to feed a ghost. Marcellus senses the exhaustion. He meets his officers by torchlight, their faces red from windburn. "We will end it before harvest," he tells them. "No more waiting, no more patience. We'll strike when they least expect it, when even their gods have gone to sleep." He begins planning a coordinated assault. Land and sea, night and noise, chaos and confusion. The first test comes with the moon half full. Roman ships glide toward the harbour in eerie silence, oars muffled with cloth. The wind is perfect, the guards half asleep. Then, just as the rams near the wall, a single light blinks from the cliffs. Archimedes' sentries have seen them. Within moments the sea erupts. Catapults fire, alarms ring, rocks crash into the water. The Romans retreat again, humiliated. Marcellus doesn't rage this time. He smiles. "They're tired," he says softly. "They can still see, but they can't move forever." He's right. The next weeks drag the city to breaking point. Bread disappears entirely. The garrison eats boiled leather. Soldiers faint on the walls. Archimedes stops leaving his workshop. The once mighty harbour, once a symphony of trade, now smells of rot and stagnant water. The last fishing boats sit half-sunk at their moorings, silent memorials to hope. One night, lightning splits the sky, revealing both camps in ghostly blue flashes. Romans drenched in armour, Greeks clutching torches. For a heartbeat you see the entire war frozen. Genius against endurance, light against iron. And then it's gone. Just rain again, just waiting. Marcellus walks through his camp, water dripping from his helmet. "They can't last another storm," he says. "When the next wind comes from the sea, we'll go in." In Ortygia, Archimedes listens to the same wind howling through broken shutters. He presses his palm to the wall, feels it tremble, and closes his eyes. "So this," he murmurs, "is the sound of equations ending. The Romans will soon strike again. This time, the gods won't answer. The wind finally shifts. It comes hard from the sea, rolling waves against the harbour and rattling every shutter in the sleeping city. It's early spring, 212 BCE, and the siege of Syracuse is about to break its balance. You're on the ramparts when the alarm bells start. 3 quick strikes, the signal for an attack from the water. The sentries grab spears and run, but the fog is thick, the kind that tastes like metal and hides the horizon. Out in the mist you hear oars, hundreds of them. Rome is moving again. Marcellus has chosen his moment well. The storms have passed. The city's defenders are weak, and the garrison's night watch has thinned. His plan is ruthless simplicity. A feigned assault by land to draw attention, then a surprise strike by sea under cover of darkness and weather. Rome doesn't need genius anymore, just timing. From the cliffs above the great harbour, Archimedes' apprentices light their signal lamps, but the wind snuffs them out. Down below, the Roman fleet glides forward, black shapes merging with fog. On each deck, soldiers clutch grappling hooks and torches soaked in pitch. The order is whispered, not shouted. No sound until the gates burn. Then it begins. A single trumpet from the Roman shore answers the thunder. Siege engines roll forward, crashing against the western walls. From within Syracuse, bells and shouts rise. Defenders rush to the noise, believing it another frontal assault. On the opposite side, unnoticed, the fleet presses into the harbour mouth. When the first torches land on the wooden gate, the sea flashes orange. Archimedes' machines answer, but the old rhythm is gone. Catapults misfire, ropes snap. The operators, half-starved, drop stones short of their targets. The Roman marines climb over floating debris, shields locked, their boots splashing in the firelit surf. Syracuse, the city of thinkers, has become a city of panic. You hear the crash of the first gate giving way, a sound like a rib breaking. The Romans surge through the breach, cutting down defenders too weak to stand. Arrows hiss from the towers, but there are fewer now, and the wind blows the shafts wide. The fog that once protected the city now cloaks its killers. On land, Appius Claudius launches his diversion in earnest. Battering rams pound the Epipolae heights, while ladders rise like crooked spines against the outer wall. The defenders, stretched thin, run from one end of the city to the other, chasing ghosts. For the first time, the coordination that made Syracuse invincible collapses into chaos. Archimedes himself is still at his post, wrapped in a wool cloak against the chill. He gives orders quietly, refusing to panic. Aim low, he tells the engineers. Always low. Gravity is faithful, even when men are not. But faith and physics can't feed soldiers or replace the dead. By dawn, the Romans have a foothold. Two of their largest ships anchor directly below the wall, forming a bridge for more troops. Marcellus stands on his flagship, shouting commands across the roar of wind and fire. Press them! Don't stop! The old fox can't save them twice. And he's right. The legendary engines are falling silent one by one. Rope and wood rot faster than courage, and there's no spare material left to repair them. What had once been miracles now creak and crumble. You can almost see Archimedes' face as he realizes his geometry has finally met its limit. Everything decays, he whispers, even precision. By midday, the harbour is a cauldron. Smoke, corpses, and broken ships swirling in one red tide. The Romans drag their siege towers onto the piers and begin rolling them toward the inner walls. The citizens retreat to Ortia, praying that the gods of the sea will pity them. None do. Marcellus orders his men to hold position and rest. He's cautious now, remembering how easily Archimedes once turned victory into slaughter. We'll take her slowly, he tells his officers. She's earned a careful death. The rain begins again, light at first, then steady. The fires hiss but do not die. Syracuse's defenders collapse in the mud, too exhausted even to curse. Somewhere in the city, a temple bell rings weakly. Not alarm, but surrender. From the hilltop you can see it all. The harbour glowing like molten bronze, Roman standards rising among the ruins, and the great city gasping under its own brilliance. For the first time since the siege began, the silence belongs to Rome. In his workshop, Archimedes sits beside a dying lamp, tracing circles in the dust. So ends the problem, he murmurs. Outside, thunder answers him. You wake to a city that smells of smoke and salt water, the scent of defeat creeping under every door. Dawn has come, but no one cheers. The Romans have breached the harbour and now grind forward through the outer districts. The siege that once felt endless has collapsed into chaos. Syracuse is falling piece by piece. You stand near the Epipolae heights, the upper plateau that crowns the city like a fortress. For years it was impregnable. Archimedes' final line of defence, where stone walls met cliffs too steep for ladders. But the Romans, patient as rust, have been tunnelling for months. The earth beneath your feet vibrates. Then, with a muffled crack, part of the rampart gives way, collapsing inward. Dust explodes skyward. From below you hear horns. The legions are coming. Marcellus leads from the front. His armour gleams, not from vanity, but from method. The man treats war like sculpture, cutting away resistance until perfection remains. He has divided his army into small strike units. Each moves independently, scaling breaches, cutting through alleys. Syracuse's strength, its size, its walls, its multiple quarters, has become its weakness. The Romans are inside the labyrinth now. The Syracusans fight with desperation. You see them along the walls, gaunt and hollow-eyed, hurling spears they can barely lift. Women pour boiling oil from rooftops. Even priests take up swords looted from temple treasuries. The air hums with cries, Latin and Greek mixing in one long scream. Archimedes' last machines fire from the inner gates, but they are few and sluggish. Ropes fray, stones miss. The old man watches from a tower, expression unreadable. "Force without balance," he murmurs. "That's not victory, that's collapse." The Romans advance methodically. Each time they're pushed back, they return with ladders, grappling hooks, and fire. Every street they capture becomes a barricade for the next. The fighting is so close that no formation matters, just will and exhaustion. In the harbour, the Roman fleet seals the final escape routes. Ortygia, the island heart of Syracuse, is cut off completely. The great ships that once carried trade and science now burn where they're moored, their sails curling into ash. Fishermen dive into the water to flee. Roman javelins meet them mid-swim. By nightfall, the defenders of Epipolae are trapped. A handful of officers argue whether to surrender. Others talk of dying on the walls. Archimedes urges them to think. Even now he refuses panic. Syracuse will fall, he says plainly, but wisdom must not. He orders his apprentices to save his instruments, his drawings, his theorems. Numbers outlive empires, he tells them. It sounds like comfort, but it's resignation. Down below, Marcellus surveys the burning lower city. Flames light the columns of Athena's temple, turning them into pillars of blood-red light. "Not yet," he tells his men. "Tomorrow we finish it." He knows the city's defenders won't sleep, and neither will his. The next dawn will bring final reckoning. The night is strange, half silence, half nightmare. From one quarter you hear chanting. The old hymns of Apollo sung as if sound could hold back fire. From another, drunken laughter, Romans celebrating too early, looting the outer markets. The sky glows orange, reflecting in the harbour like a false sunrise. In his study, Archimedes writes by lamplight. He sketches the geometry of parabolas one last time, his hand trembling slightly. He's aware of the noise outside, but it seems distant. "The universe," he mutters, "remains perfectly balanced, even when men are not." His apprentices beg him to leave, to hide. He waves them off gently. "I have lived my life drawing circles," he says. "I'll die inside one." Meanwhile, Roman scouts creep closer through the sleeping districts. They find a small postern gate unguarded. Famine has thinned even vigilance. Before dawn, a cohort slips through, blades drawn, killing the sentries in silence. The gate opens, trumpets blare. The legions surge through like a flood. When the sun rises, it finds Syracuse burning. Smoke trails from every quarter, curling into the clear morning sky. The city that once defied empires now glitters with fire and ruin. Marcellus rides through the breach at Epipolae, his horse's hooves crunching over marble and bones. He halts at the sight of the temples half collapsed, their statues shattered but still graceful. "Even dying, she's beautiful," he murmurs. Then he gives the order, "Spare the libraries. Everything else, take." You watch the legionaries pour through the streets, red cloaks flapping, eyes wide with greed. Some kill, some plunder, some weep. Every soldier becomes history's accomplice. Syracuse screams once, then falls silent forever, and somewhere in that silence Archimedes draws his final circle. Morning breaks pale and metallic. Smoke veils the sun, drifting in slow ribbons over the ruins of Syracuse. You're standing in the shadow of the Temple of Athena, now a shell of marble ribs and cinders. The siege is over. Rome has won. The air still tastes of ash and iron. The city that once dazzled the Mediterranean lies broken. Marble columns toppled, mosaics buried under soot, streets carpeted with corpses and shattered pottery. The great harbour, once a gleaming mirror of ships, is now a graveyard of hulls and masts. The water reflects flame instead of light. Marcellus rides through the devastation on a black horse, his armour smeared with soot. His officers trail behind him, half proud, half uneasy. The general is silent. He's seen victory before, but this feels different, too absolute, too quiet. He looks up toward Ortygia, the citadel island, and mutters, "Syracuse has fallen like a goddess struck from her altar." The Romans move methodically. They split the city into sectors, one for looting, one for prisoners, one for fire control. The discipline is chilling, plunder written like mathematics. Soldiers drag statues from temples, pry gems from altars, roll amphorae of wine and oil toward the harbour to ship back to Rome. Others, drunk on adrenaline, run wild. You see them breaking down doors, torching houses, laughing as gold melts. The conquerors are efficient thieves, but they're still men. Inside what remains of his home, Archimedes works on. The old mathematician sits hunched over his table, tracing diagrams into the sand. Around him, the world burns. He hears none of it. The city's collapse doesn't interest him. Only the perfect geometry of a circle does. Everything returns to form, he murmurs, even destruction. But fate has found him. A Roman patrol, scavenging for valuables, bursts into his courtyard. They don't know who he is. To them he's just another old Greek in a robe hunched over strange symbols. One soldier demands his attention, waving a sword. Archimedes, absorbed, doesn't look up. "Do not disturb my circles," he says, his voice calm, almost absent-minded. The soldier hesitates, confused, then, whether by fear, impulse, or misunderstanding, drives his blade forward. It's quick, a shout, a flash of blood, and one of history's greatest minds crumples into the sand he loved so much. The sword tip slices through a diagram of a parabola. Geometry meets mortality in one stroke. When Marcellus hears what's happened, he's furious. "I gave orders that he be spared," he roars. But it's too late. The soldier is executed on the spot, a gesture without comfort. The general orders Archimedes' body to be buried with honour, his drawings collected, his instruments saved. Yet he knows no burial will undo the irony. Syracuse's mind has died at the hands of its conqueror's ignorance. As the day drags on, Rome's efficiency resumes. The libraries are emptied, scrolls packed into crates marked for the Senate. Artworks, bronzes, and jewels are loaded onto ships bound for the Tiber. Among them are Archimedes' own devices, pulleys, spheres, and a mysterious bronze globe said to map the motions of the heavens. Marcellus pauses before it, mesmerized. "So small," he says, "to hold so much." He leaves the temple quarter and walks through the ruins. Citizens kneel in the streets, pleading for mercy. Some are spared, others enslaved. It's not cruelty, it's routine. Rome builds its greatness on order, and order begins with obedience. As evening falls, Marcellus climbs to the ramparts. From there he can see the whole city, its harbour glowing with dying fires, its temples stripped bare. He removes his helmet and sighs. "She resisted like a queen," he says softly, "and fell like a lover." Then, to his adjutant, "Send word to Rome. Tell them Syracuse is ours." The messenger bows and leaves. Marcellus lingers, listening to the crackle of burning wood, the distant wailing of the captured. For a moment he almost seems to grieve. Down in the harbour, ships groan as they're loaded with spoils. Soldiers sing drunken victory songs. Slaves chain their new captives. The city that once glimmered with intellect now glimmers only with firelight. On a quiet street near the agora, a breeze stirs the sand where Archimedes fell. The wind smooths the blood into dust, erasing the last imperfect line of his final circle. Above, the smoke clears enough to reveal the stars, the same constellations he once measured, unchanged, unreachable. Rome has conquered Syracuse, but what it doesn't realize yet is that the old man's mind, his theorems, his proportions, his questions, will outlive both. The city dies. The ideas don't. The fires burn for 3 days. Smoke rolls over the sea like mourning cloth. By the fourth morning only embers remain, curling between broken columns and shattered altars. You walk through the ruins and realize the silence is not peace, it's exhaustion. Syracuse, once the proudest of Greek cities, has been erased not by time, but by patience. Rome's patience. Marcellus stands in the agora surrounded by loot, bronze statues of gods, silver urns, scrolls bound in leather. Around him, the legionaries work like merchants, counting, sorting, recording. The war is over. Now comes the accounting. Scribes dip pens into ink while slaves load carts. One notes, 1,000 talents of silver, 7,000 captives. Numbers where lives once were. Among the treasures sits Archimedes' mechanical sphere, his model of the cosmos. A soldier pokes at it, curious, until an officer snatches it away. Careful, he says, that's worth more than you are. He doesn't know what it does, only that it moves. When the gears turn, little bronze planets spin, tracing the heavens. The world reduced to motion, the cosmos in miniature. A city dies, the stars remain on schedule. Marcellus orders the device packed gently. This, he says, goes to Rome. His tone is almost reverent. He knows this is no ordinary plunder. This is proof that Syracuse was more than walls and gold. It was mind. And that mind is what Rome has come to claim. The soldiers march through Ortia, collecting survivors. Women clutch children. Old men stare blankly. A few soldiers weep quietly as they pass the bodies of those who fought bravely. Others loot, with wild joy. The Senate will celebrate their discipline, not their humanity. When night falls, the harbour flickers with torchlight as the ships prepare to sail. Statues of Athena, Apollo, and Hermes are hoisted aboard, tied down like trophies. Chests of silver and scrolls follow. Rome takes everything: gods, knowledge, memory. The city that taught the world balance has been unbalanced completely. Marcellus watches from the pier. He's a soldier, not a philosopher, but he feels the unease of victory. "We have taken her body," he says softly, "but not her soul." His aide doesn't answer. There's no word in Latin for irony that deep. The next morning the legions assemble for departure. Trumpets blare. The banners of the Republic rise against the dawn. The surviving Syracusans are marched in chains toward the ships. Some spit, others sing old hymns. One man carries a small bronze compass, the last relic of Archimedes' workshop. A centurion takes it from him and tosses it into the sea. The splash is small, but it sounds enormous. When the ships finally pull away, the ruins shrink behind them, gold glinting faintly in the sun. The Roman oars dip in unison, their rhythm as precise as the machines they've destroyed. Marcellus stands at the prow, watching the city recede. For a long while he says nothing. Then, to no one in particular, he murmurs, "It's strange. We conquer, and yet we inherit. Even their ghosts will educate us." He's right. In the decades to come, Rome will use Archimedes' theories to build stronger weapons, smarter aqueducts, better siege engines. Greek thought will become Roman discipline. Syracuse will live on inside the Republic that killed it. Behind them, the island smoulders. The wind off the sea carries the faint smell of charred olive wood and burned papyrus, the scent of a library dying. Birds circle overhead, cautious, as if unwilling to land on what's left. In the distance, a few surviving Syracusans emerge from hiding. Fishermen, widows, slaves who escaped chains. They move among the ruins quietly, as though afraid to disturb the ashes. One kneels in the sand where Archimedes fell and whispers a prayer, not to gods, but to memory. May we not forget. The waves answer, gentle and endless. Syracuse has fallen, but the echo of its brilliance stretches far beyond its walls. Rome will carry its spoils home, but centuries later, when both empire and conqueror are dust, people will still speak the old man's name, still calculate his circles, still marvel at the city that dared to think against power. You stand on the shore as the last Roman sail dips below the horizon, the smoke fading into sky. The silence feels eternal. Then a single seabird cries, sharp and lonely, before vanishing toward the west. That's how history closes a chapter, not with thunder, but with distance. The years pass, but the memory of the fall lingers like smoke that never clears. You're walking again through what remains of Syracuse, though now the weeds have grown where marble once gleamed. The wind sighs through hollow archways, carrying the faint sound of waves washing over broken stones. This is no longer a city, it's a wound-turned fossil. Rome wastes no time binding the scar. The Senate decrees that Syracuse will become a Roman possession, its harbour reopened under new masters. Administrators arrive with scrolls and seals, tax assessors, and engineers. They rebuild what they need: docks, warehouses, barracks. The rest, temples, theatres, libraries, they let crumble. Utility, says one Roman engineer, is the noblest art. The ghosts of poets and philosophers would disagree, but no one listens to ghosts anymore. The surviving Syracusans adapt as conquered people always do, slowly, bitterly, then completely. The markets reopen under Latin names. The Forum replaces the Agora. Latin replaces Greek in public decrees. A few locals serve Rome eagerly, collecting taxes, managing estates. Others slip into silence, haunted by the memory of fire. But something strange happens in the aftermath. Rome, in destroying Syracuse, begins to absorb it. The very culture it sought to conquer seeps into its bloodstream. Roman architects study the ruins, tracing the proportions of temples they had toppled. Engineers examine fragments of Archimedes' machines and begin replicating them. His mathematics becomes military doctrine. Geometry, once a language of peace, becomes the Republic's secret weapon. Marcellus himself carries Archimedes' manuscripts back to the capital. In Rome, they are paraded alongside statues and spoils. The people cheer the general as conqueror of Syracuse, but philosophers murmur that he has brought home something greater than gold. Cicero, centuries later, will call Marcellus the saviour of Greek genius. It's half flattery, half lament. You can picture the manuscripts laid out in marble halls, scrolls smudged with soot, diagrams fading. Roman scholars pore over them by lamplight, trying to decipher symbols they barely understand. They trace the curves of spheres, the ratios of levers, the laws of buoyancy, without realizing they're touching the mind that defied them. Archimedes becomes both trophy and teacher. Meanwhile, in Sicily, the Roman governor begins organizing the island as a province, the first in Rome's history. Tribute flows north: grain, slaves, silver. Syracuse becomes a cog in an empire's stomach, feeding the city that starved it. From this conquest, Rome perfects its method of rule. Every future province, Spain, Gaul, Asia, Egypt, will be governed in Syracuse's image: crush rebellion, exploit resources, adopt culture. Empire as equation. For the Syracusans who remain, life resumes in the ruins. Farmers return to the fields. Merchants trade with Roman soldiers. Children grow up speaking two tongues. Yet at night, when the streets empty, the older generation still whispers stories of what the city was: the golden days of Hero, the laughter in the amphitheatre, the sound of Archimedes arguing with the sea breeze about the weight of the world. Those stories linger like embers, refusing to go out. Marcellus dies not long after, during another campaign. The Senate honours him with triumphs and statues. On one, carved into the base, are his own words: "I took Syracuse, the richest of Greek cities." There is no mention of the man who made it great. But history remembers differently. When later generals study siegecraft, they cite Archimedes. When philosophers speak of the balance between power and intellect, they recall Syracuse. The conqueror fades, the thinker endures. Centuries later, when Cicero governs Sicily, he visits the city's ruins. Guided by locals, he searches for Archimedes' tomb. They find it half buried under brambles, neglected, the carving of a sphere inside a cylinder barely visible. Cicero orders it cleared and preserved. "So passes greatness," he writes. "The man who lifted worlds is forgotten by his own." You pause by that same tomb, the air heavy with dust and silence. Above, the sun sinks behind what's left of the city walls. The stones are warm under your hand, almost alive. Somewhere deep in the earth, the old harbour still breathes, waves pushing in, pulling out, steady as a heartbeat. Syracuse no longer shines, but it endures in memory, in mathematics, in language. Rome thought it had ended a rival. Instead, it had created a mirror. The empire grows, the island sleeps. And somewhere between the two, the shadow of Archimedes still sketches circles in the sand, waiting for the next mind brave enough to understand. The years blur into decades, and Syracuse becomes something else. Not a city of marble and light, but a name whispered in academies, a warning wrapped in memory. You walk its streets again, though now they're Roman streets, paved in uniform stone, straight as an equation. Latin inscriptions replace Greek verses. The walls that once defied legions now hold frescoes of Roman gods, yet beneath the surface the old soul stirs. The harbour still glitters in the sun, its waters calm, almost deceitfully so. Roman galleys dock where Archimedes' war machines once swung their claws. Merchants sell Sicilian wine and olive oil to centurions, unaware that their market square once held the speeches of philosophers. Syracuse lives, subdued, domesticated, but breathing. Rome has done what it always does best, turned memory into utility. From Archimedes' designs, Roman engineers learned to perfect pulleys, catapults, and screw pumps. The On the Sphere and Cylinder becomes a treasured scroll among scholars, while his lost treatises, The Method on Floating Bodies, travel quietly through the hands of thinkers who barely grasp their depth. Each generation borrows from him, not knowing they're still tracing the mind of a man who told a soldier not to disturb his circles. The irony is thick. Rome, the destroyer, becomes student to the destroyed. Its emperors build libraries modelled on Greek plans, fund academies filled with stolen ideas, and claim philosophy as a Roman virtue. Even the word ingenium, genius, shifts its meaning. No longer divine spark, but disciplined intellect. Syracuse's ghost is teaching Rome how to think. And yet, something essential is gone. The spontaneity, the curiosity, the wild joy of the Greek mind, it doesn't thrive in marble halls. Rome studies genius. It doesn't live it. Its scholars admire Archimedes, but they never risk becoming him. They quote him in speeches, but fear his independence. The empire prizes order more than imagination, conquest more than curiosity. In that sense, the real Syracuse, the one of laughter and inquiry, remains fallen. Still, the stories survive. Greek sailors tell tales of the old mathematician who built suns from mirrors. Children in Alexandria repeat the phrase Eureka, without knowing it came from a bath in this very city. And philosophers, even Roman ones, speak his name in reverence. If wisdom has a shape, one writes, it is the curve of Archimedes' circle. Centuries turn. The Republic becomes empire. Emperors rise and fall. But Syracuse remains, a provincial capital, useful, forgotten. It endures earthquakes, invasions, neglect. Its stones crumble, but its memory does not. The Romans who walk its streets don't realize they tread on layers of brilliance and ruin, on the dust of poets and inventors. Then one day, far from Sicily in the city of Alexandria, a scholar unrolls a charred scroll and finds a fragment of Archimedes' handwriting. The ink has faded, but the thought shines through. Give me a place to stand, and I will move the world. He copies it carefully, knowing the line will outlive them all, and it does. That single sentence, equal parts pride, wonder, and science, becomes the thread that ties centuries together. It's whispered in Renaissance workshops, quoted by physicists, echoed by dreamers who build telescopes and rockets. Every age that dares to think owes something to that old man's defiance. Back in Syracuse, time keeps doing what it does, erasing, replacing, renewing. The Roman baths crumble into Byzantine chapels, the chapels into Norman fortresses. The city changes languages, gods and rulers, but the same waves still crash against the same stones. If you listen closely at night, when the harbour is still, you can almost hear the ghost of Archimedes pacing by the water, muttering to himself, measuring stars in silence. Rome may have claimed his body, but no empire ever owned his mind. The fall of Syracuse was supposed to be an ending, one city extinguished, one empire triumphant. But as the centuries prove, it was something else entirely, a transfer, a transformation, the birth of an idea that refused to die. From his circle in the sand, Archimedes taught the world the only lesson that outlasts power, that brilliance once lit can never truly be conquered. By the time the century turns, the name Syracuse has begun to fade from the tongues of generals and merchants, replaced by new provinces, new wars, new glories. Yet beneath the shifting maps of empire, the city still breathes in the quiet language of continuity. You walk through its rebuilt forum and see Roman columns rising where Greek marble once stood. The architecture is sterner now, functional, square, stripped of flourish. Still, if you listen closely, you can almost hear the old voices behind the stone, murmuring in Greek beneath the Latin inscriptions. Rome has claimed the land, but not the lineage. Every aqueduct arch, every marble road owes something invisible to this place. The Romans learned their craft here, their mathematics, their measurement, their obsession with order. Syracuse's ghost has infiltrated the Republic's bloodstream, refining it even as it fades. The city itself becomes a museum of contradictions. Roman governors build theatres to stage Greek tragedies. Senators commission statues of Homer beside busts of Cicero. Children play with pebbles in the courtyards, drawing circles in imitation of a man they never knew. That's how he died, their parents tell them. He refused to stop calculating. They say it as a warning, not a tribute. Genius, in the New World, is dangerous if it ignores command. Trade revives the harbour. The same sea that once brought Roman warships now carries grain, marble, and papyrus. Merchants arrive from Egypt, Spain, and Gaul. The city's streets fill again with languages: Latin, Greek, Phoenician, Punic. But this time they mingle peacefully. Syracuse becomes what it always was destined to be, a crossroads of the world. Yet peace feels strange here, too quiet, too precise. The Romans rebuild everything in their image, and in doing so erase the traces of the brilliance that once made the city unique. The library, once a place of debate and experiment, becomes an archive of imperial decrees. Knowledge is now property, not pursuit. Even Archimedes' inventions, copied and improved, serve only to crush new enemies. The claw, the catapult, the mirror, all find their way into Rome's arsenals. Ideas become weapons. You stand in the amphitheatre during a festival honouring Marcellus. The citizens cheer. The governor recites verses about Rome's glory, and a bronze statue of the conqueror gleams in the sunlight. Below the pedestal, unnoticed, a small stone bears a faint inscription: to Archimedes, who measured the world. Two names, side by side, the sword and the mind. The crowd only remembers one. Time keeps thinning the memory. Generations pass. The Greeks of Sicily intermarry with Romans, their accents blending, their gods merging. The temples too, Athena and Apollo, become churches to new saints. The marble of the agora is quarried to build fortifications. Even the geometry of the streets changes, straightened and squared to suit Roman tastes. But some things refuse to vanish. On quiet evenings, when the sun falls red over the harbour, fishermen still tell stories of the old siege. They point to the cliffs and say, "That's where the mirrors burned the ships." They don't know if it's true, they don't care. The story itself is enough, a flicker of light, a defiance of impossibility. Far away in Rome, the legacy of Syracuse deepens. Scholars translate Archimedes' writings into Latin, spreading them through academies from Africa to Gaul. Each empire that follows inherits the fragments: Byzantines, Arabs, scholars of Cordoba and Cairo, monks of Europe. The name Syracuse becomes shorthand for lost genius, the city that fell, yet never truly disappeared. By now, the Roman Empire itself is cracking, stretched too far, too proud. Its legions, once as unstoppable as tides, now retreat from frontiers. Its capital rots in politics and plague. You can almost feel history reversing. The conqueror a Jing, the conquered immortal. The same arrogance that doomed Syracuse begins to consume Rome, and when the empire finally fractures, its libraries burn, its statues crumble, and its gods are forgotten, but not its geometry. The ideas born here, refined here, stolen here, they survive. On a stormy night, centuries after the siege, a monk in some far monastery copies a faded line from an old Greek scroll. "Give me a place to stand, and I will move the world." He doesn't know the man who wrote it, or the city where it was born. But as his quill scratches the parchment, you can almost see a shadow smile somewhere across time. Syracuse, the fallen, has outlived her destroyer. Rome is dust. Her mathematics remain, and Archimedes still moves the world one circle at a time. The centuries roll forward like waves, and Syracuse drifts in and out of history's light. You return now to find it changed again, smaller, humbler, yet still alive. The empire that conquered it has long since cracked into pieces. The world that once trembled before Rome's eagles now belongs to new powers, new gods, new tongues. Yet here on the Sicilian coast the stones remember. The harbour still curves in the same crescent shape that Archimedes measured, the same horizon where Marcellus' fleet once burned. Fishermen mend nets beside Roman ruins. Children chase gulls over the marble fragments of temples. The sea has reclaimed what men once fought for. It polishes everything, even memory. In the Byzantine age, Syracuse briefly rises again. The emperors in Constantinople call it the Shield of the West and station governors here. The city glows with mosaics, its churches built atop the skeletons of Greek sanctuaries. You can still see Athena's columns hidden inside the cathedral, walls, pagan pillars holding up Christian prayers. But the echoes are uneasy. Each new faith, each new empire, layers itself on the bones of the old. Centuries later, the Arabs arrive, traders first, conquerors next. They rename the city Syracuse, fill its markets with silk and spices, and teach astronomy under the same skies Archimedes once mapped. They don't speak his name, but his spirit fits naturally among them, mathematicians who see the divine in geometry. Under their rule, the city hums with quiet prosperity. For a while, the past feels reconciled. Then come the Normans, armoured giants from the cold north, draping crosses over minarets, raising castles where academies once stood. They call themselves kings of Sicily, but they too bow to the ghosts of this place. Even they sense the weight of centuries under their boots. Each ruler who stands on these stones feels what the Romans once felt, admiration mixed with unease, the strange humility that genius imposes on power. You walk the streets in twilight. The air smells of salt, jasmine, and old dust. The stones underfoot are smooth from 1,000 civilizations worth of footsteps. You realize that no one ever truly owned Syracuse. The Greeks built it, the Romans broke it, the Byzantines patched it, the Arabs refined it, the Normans crowned it, and through all of it the sea keeps whispering the same syllables: rise, fall, repeat. Somewhere in the cathedral a priest chants over the tomb once believed to hold Archimedes' remains. The inscription has been rewritten so many times that it's half legend, half wish. Tourists in togas of the modern kind, hats, cameras, guidebooks, wander through, snapping pictures of what they think is history. But history here is not something you visit. It's something that watches you. Outside, the sun dips low. Its reflection flashes on the water, bright as the rumour of mirrors that once set ships ablaze. You smile. The legend has outlasted the fact, and maybe that's the truest form of immortality. Archimedes didn't need the gods to grant eternity. He just needed curiosity. Every schoolchild who learns his theorems, every engineer who tests a lever, every thinker who wonders at the stars, they keep his pulse alive. You pause at the edge of the harbour, where fishermen still haul their catch using screw pumps descended from his design. They don't know his name, they just know the device works. That's enough. He's become invisible, not forgotten, woven into the world's function, not its monuments. In the fading light, you can almost see him, the old man bent over the sand, drawing circles as the city burns. The waves wash closer, erasing the lines one by one. But the motion never stops. He draws, the sea erases, and the world remembers. Rome is gone, empires have come and gone, Syracuse remains, smaller, quieter, eternal in its humility. The stones that once echoed with siege engines now hum with laughter, markets, and prayer. Civilization survives not by victory but by repetition, by rebuilding what was lost, by remembering even through ruin. You turn from the harbour as the first stars appear. Above them, unseen but inevitable, the planets move along the paths Archimedes once imagined, still turning, still perfect. The city sleeps, and the world keeps orbiting his thought. Evening comes quietly to the island now. Syracuse no longer burns or boasts, it glows. The light on the water turns silver, the gulls drift low, and the wind carries no sound of conquest. Only waves folding against the old stones. You stand on the same ground that once shook beneath Roman catapults, and realise that the earth has long since forgiven everything. The harbour is calm, almost too calm. The fishermen call it Archimedes' mirror. They don't mean it, but the phrase sticks. The reflections are flawless. Sky, stone, sail, all held together by stillness. The city is small again, almost modest. Its streets curve softly between ruins and roses. The cathedral bells mark the hour, their tone as patient as the sea. There are no conquerors here anymore, only caretakers. The descendants of Greeks, Romans, Arabs and Normans all share the same market square, selling oranges and oil where armies once marched. The voices blend, 100 accents, one rhythm. The world that once fought for Syracuse now passes through it in peace. You walk through Ortygia past the fountain of Arethusa, where legend says the nymph still rises with each dawn. The air smells of sea salt and basil. Children play on the worn marble steps of the old fort, unaware that they're kicking stones once soaked in blood. That's the quiet miracle of time. It makes playgrounds out of battlefields. In a small courtyard near the sea, an old guide gestures toward a plaque. Archimedes lived here, it reads, though no one can prove it. A handful of tourists pause to take photos. One murmurs the famous line, "Give me a place to stand," and trails off smiling. The words have travelled 20 centuries, outliving every empire that tried to bury them. You sit by the water as the sky deepens into indigo. The city's lights blink on, soft, golden, unhurried. Somewhere, a violin plays an old Sicilian tune that sounds suspiciously like a lament and a lullaby at once. The breeze tastes of salt and memory. This, you realise, is how history ends. Not in noise, not in glory, but in gentleness. The wars, the genius, the pride, the fire, all have melted into something slower, kinder, eternal. The story that began with blood and brilliance finishes in balance. Syracuse, once crushed by Rome's ambition, has become what Archimedes himself might have loved best. A lesson in equilibrium. You close your eyes and listen. The waves whisper through the harbour walls, the same rhythm that lulled the city through centuries of rise and ruin. Somewhere, beyond the horizon, the planets move in their measured paths, obeying laws the old man uncovered while the world burned around him. The stars look close tonight, as if leaning down to see how his equations turned out. You think of him in his last moment, kneeling in the dust, murmuring about circles while a sword hung over him. That image, repeated through ages, feels less like tragedy and more like devotion. He wasn't refusing the soldier, he was refusing chaos. He wanted the universe to remain precise, even in death, and it did. His geometry lives on in the ships that sail this harbour, in the arches of bridges, in the satellites orbiting a world he never imagined. His city too lives, reshaped but unbroken. Humanity learned something here, that power fades, but thought does not. The moon rises, pale and round, gliding over the water. You trace its reflection, a perfect circle trembling with every wave, and smile. He would have liked that. So breathe. The siege is over, the flames have gone out, the genius sleeps, and the world, once moved by his lever, keeps turning in silence. The sea hums softly against the stone. The stars drift higher. The night folds around Syracuse like a promise kept. Sleep easy, traveller of history. The city of Archimedes keeps its vigil. The fire has long gone out, and the stones of Syracuse are cool again. You can almost hear them breathing. The hush between waves, the faint hum of wind through broken arches. Everything that was fierce has gentled. The ships are gone, the army's dust, the equation still quietly turning inside the world. You picture the harbour at night, silver light pooling on the water, gulls asleep on the pier, a fisherman humming an old tune without knowing it's older than Rome itself. That's how history really survives. Not in marble or memory, but in small, ordinary sounds that forget to die. Somewhere in that calm, Archimedes still draws. The sand smooths over his circles, the tide rewrites his work, and he begins again. He doesn't need temples or titles. The sea is his blackboard now, the stars his proof. You can almost hear his whisper. Everything moves, even after ending. So let the noise of conquest fade and keep only the quiet. Let the lessons settle like dust. The patience of Rome, the brilliance of Greece, the mercy of time. The world is still learning how to balance them. Close your eyes and drift with the water's rhythm. Imagine the city sleeping beneath its own reflection, dreaming not of fire but of calm. Somewhere beyond the dark, the moon slides across the same sky Archimedes once measured, unbothered, eternal. The siege is over now. The story is safe. You've walked through smoke and genius and silence and come out the other side. Rest easy. The circles hold. Good night. Sweet dreams.